Did you know the number of women interested in and working in STEM fields in the United States is significantly lower than men? Studies show that out of all children interested in STEM fields, 35% are girls and 65% are boys. However, in the workforce, only 25% of tech positions are held by women, and even more drastically, only 11% of tech executives are women. Furthermore, while nearly half of the global population is female, they make up only 13% of the world's engineers. Did you know that even though blacks and Hispanics represent 30% of the U.S. population, they represent only 12% of STEM workers combined? Also, while the retention of women and men are similar, the numbers across ethnicities differ rather significantly. In these graphs, retention is shown as the difference between the green and gray bars. As you can see, African Americans have the lowest retention rate among ethnicities. Did you know, while approximately 300,000 students major in STEM fields, only about half will graduate in those fields? This means that out of all students who enter high school in the United States, only about 4% are expected to be STEM college graduates. In 2013, a study showed that 9% of the students that took the ACT had a measured interest for STEM, but did not express a desire to pursue STEM careers. This 9% has a measured interest in engineering-type work, but does not connect those tasks to the engineering field. Students need to be informed about what engineering involves, and outreach needs to be done to encourage them to enter engineering. Something needs to be done to address these issues within engineering. The emerging field of engineering education aims at solving these problems by molding a new generation of engineers to create a vibrant future. Some of the problems that engineering education researchers are working on include underrepresentation, outreach, retention, and student development. So, how is engineering education attempting to fix these problems? We caught up with engineering education experts and discussed each of these issues. Here's what they had to say.
Women are choosing engineering at lower rates than men. They persist at the same rates as men once they choose engineering in college, but we are still nationally at about 20% of bachelor's degrees awarded to women, and that's been pretty constant over the last 30 years. So getting more women interested in engineering is something that I think is really important because they represent a different point of view from the population and can bring new innovations into the engineering space.
You could argue that a bad experience only builds biases that didn't otherwise exist up until the negative experience, which is very dangerous going forward, right? Because now a student can take this negative experience forward into their career and say, oh, I've worked with this type of person, fill in the blank, and it was a negative experience, so I don't want to work with those same type of people in my global assignment because it was a negative first experience. We all do that, right? You get burnt by the first experience, you hesitate to go again. So to your point, I think it's critical that we really think through that. How do we expose and immunize students towards these differences that can be very, very complex, beyond language, beyond visual difference?
So there's a real need for more engineers. We have large global challenges that face engineering, and the goal is to get more students choosing engineering at the transition of high school to college. So once students choose engineering in college, they tend to persist in engineering at the same rates as other STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But more students go to other STEM fields than they do to engineering specifically. So my research looks at student self-beliefs, how they view themselves, how they view themselves in relation to science and math, since most students don't have direct experiences with engineering in high school, and how those beliefs affect engineering choices in the transition to high school to college. And what I see is that students believing that others see them as math people or science people have a really strong effect on whether or not they feel like they can be an engineer. And so promoting those experiences through authentic experiences with engineering, specifically things like having them interact with design and iteration and collecting data, but then also implementing that project and feeling like they actually accomplished something is really powerful for developing engineers.
We need to understand what kind of pedagogical practices in the classroom, how does that translate to student learning, and what do students end up getting out of it. We need assessment practices, like how do you know if the students are learning anything about engineering? And we need to know if the curricula is written in a way that teachers can implement it, if it's written in a way that will help students learn the different ways of thinking about engineering, and we need to know if it maps into the science and math standards. So really it comes down to, there's so much happening around this very quickly, and we actually don't know enough about the effective practices of putting engineering in the classroom at the elementary level. So we really need to understand that at a much deeper level. Therefore, we need research.
How can we better prepare students for jobs? I think the best thing that we can do is really expose them to what that real experience looks like. Mm-hmm. So practice makes perfect, right? In sports, we practice, and we kind of move up the leagues. And in many ways, that's how I see our engineering education experience, is opportunities to create authentic experiences in the classroom where they can exercise their skills, expose their vulnerabilities. We can correct misconceptions and redirect their skills and talents in a way that can be most effective. So that's kind of number one, I guess. The second thing that we can do to better prepare students is to give them realistic expectations of what this career of engineering is all about.
Engineering is a way of thinking. It's a powerful way of thinking that will transcend into the whole life of a person who understands it. And we know that kids naturally think this way, and oftentimes in school we begin to train the ways that they naturally think out of them to make them think more like school. And engineering allows them to continue to think in the creative ways that they do. I think it keeps them in the creative spaces that they should be in. And so really from a big perspective, I want all citizens to be what I'm calling STEM literate. And engineering is part of that. It's a big part of it, in fact. And so that's really important. And of course, we want all kids to have the opportunity to be anything they want when they grow up. And a student who is prepared to be an engineer when they're done can be anything they want to be.